Thank you very much. And actually, I want to thank you for being here today, especially on the third day after 3 wonderful days. Don't you agree? Didn't you have 3 amazing days? Well done, APPI. It's a wonderful team, and they look after us, and it's always a pleasure. So yes, I'm going to talk about decolonize and demonolingualize. It's not demon. Yeah, So it's a term that I've come up with, and I'll explain in a bit. But before we do that, have you ever looked inside a teacher's head? I think it looks like this. I love this picture that APPI came up with. It's full of ideas, full of approaches, full of activities. It's very creative. But I wonder, is there an activist in there? What do you think? How many of you would consider yourselves to be an activist? Put up your hands. Ooh, they were hands that went up straight away. Some of you are a bit doubtful. Well, let me see if I can change your mind by the time we get to the end of the session. So what I'm going to look at is language activism through 3 main areas, which are decolonize. Now, this is a term that's starting to come up a lot, and demonolingualize. But there's going to be this red thread through them, and the red thread is going to be the visual. So how can we actually bring in a little bit of activism into language teaching through visualizing content and linguistic elements? So the role, and I think what's important here, is the role of the arts and the role of the visual to help us understand and raise awareness of sensory experiences, because through the arts we can feel, we can see, we can taste, we can touch, and that allows us to actually understand our experiences better. Decolonize is now a term, it's been around for a very long time, and it started in indigenous local contexts such as South America, Africa, and it started with the concept, the process of decolonization. But it's more than just an historical process or a geographical process. It is also economic, cultural, psychological, emotional. So that's what we're going to look at. And then there's obviously the demonolingualize, ELT. And I think it's important for us to look at deconstruction before we can actually construct something new. So demonolingualize is a targeted act at deconstructing monolingual ideologies, I'm just reading the slide, by identifying hidden language discrimination. We sometimes talk about, yeah, it's wonderful, we all have multilingualism is the norm now, we agree with multilingualism, we think it's a great idea, but then what happens when you go into schools? Do you see multilingualism? Are we engaging with children's multilingualism? Very often we're not. So demonolingualizing education, language education, is about identifying those beliefs, those myths around being multilingual, language mixing, etc. So, what is an activist? And I think when we think of activism, we probably think of demonstrations, protests, etc. So, for climate change, and there we've got good old Greta Thunberg. And we think of the young people nowadays, the youth, who are very active in fighting for climate change. We might think of the LGBT struggle to be recognized and accepted. We also think of indigenous groups. And this picture is quite interesting. You've also got the concept of justice. So is activism just about visibility, or is it also about justice? Basic card, Black Lives Matter, and Black Lives have mattered in the 60s as well. So you've got a picture there of the civil rights movement. And the bombs, let's stop the bombs wherever they're falling. The lions, die-ins. This is a picture from South Africa. It's about the the Soweto uprising, unfortunately, where children were demonstrating and the police opened fire. Education, not deportation. This is a picture from 6 or 7 years ago. We're going through this whole thing all over again. And student movements again. This is not new. We see them on television nowadays. It's not new. It's still happening. And then, of course, gender equality. And you may think of someone like Malala Yousaf, who, with a pencil, you can educate your girls. So all of these are quite visible, aren't they? And it's what White was calling the loud forms of teacher or just activism and, strikes, etc. But they're highly visible. They are worthy. They are important. They are actions that bring a message strongly to the public. However, activism doesn't always have to be loud. It can also be quiet, less prominent. Acts of activism manifested through personal and professional choices. And that's where you come in. You make choices about what you're going to be doing in your classroom every single day. The content you're bringing into your classroom. Are you going to bring in other languages into your classroom if we think about multilingualism? Are you going to bring in that book or not? So you are constantly making those decisions. So activism is about all these Ds. Disrupt, disquiet, decenter, destabilize, deconstruct. And I think that's what you've been doing in your classrooms all the time. And so in research, practice, centering activism in language teaching, in language teacher education, has always had the preoccupation of individual and collective struggles. It's about social justice. It's about doing the best for our students. It's about creating a future, giving our students the tools to create a future that we can all live in equally and peacefully. So maybe all pedagogical work is inherently activist. So the theoretical underpinnings for this lens, this activist lens, is very much what wonderful Rose Aylett was talking about when she did a plenary yesterday. Critical pedagogy from Freire, critical race theory, culturally responsive and culturally sustaining pedagogy, funds of knowledge, decolonial practice. And just an example is this picture here. I'm not going to spend too much time on theoretical underpinnings, but if you look at this photo, this image, this illustration, it's a language nest in New Zealand. And language nests were created in the 1980s because the language was dying. Te Reo Maori, the Maori language, was dying. No one was speaking it. So what they did was they created these language nests, which are basically preschools that were complete immersion in Te Reo Maori. Today, Te Reo Maori is used across society. It is used in primary. Children can study through Te Reo Maori in pre-primary, primary, secondary, and at tertiary education. They can do their full course in Te Reo Maori. That's activism. And it was such a simple thing. Get a group of children together into a classroom and speak Maori to them. How simple is that? So activism doesn't have to be out in the streets. It is all happening in the classroom. Language education is not neutral. I don't think anything is neutral, actually. It's political. If you think of me today, here I am in front of you. I am speaking, I'm an educated woman. I traveled to Portugal all by myself. I didn't need the permission of my husband. I can open a bank account without a man's signature. I can study until I get a PhD. I can be called a doctor. That's because someone in my past actually went out on the streets and fought for me, and fought for my right to be here speaking to you today. So we need to go beyond the depoliticized version of critical thinking, and we really need to think, how are we positioned in society? How is education positioned in society? And what does it do for society? And then you have English as well, because if you think about the English language, a lot of the programs and the curricula are actually from English dominant countries. What does that tell us? Because I think that the tacit acceptance of these countries that are English speaking, usually white, usually monocultural, they actually camouflage a load of multiple diversities that exist underneath that very thin veneer of the English-speaking countries. So what if we go underneath? What will we find if we go underneath that veneer? So what I've done is, I very often work with this framework which allows me to think of what I need to take into the classroom in order to get my students thinking critically about the languages that they are learning, about the content that we are bringing into the classroom and that we are discussing. Perhaps this will help them to help decenter their perspectives a little. So what I do, and I've used this actually with a course, I don't know if anybody's here, from a course that I do for APPI around multilingualism. So first of all, divulge, it's 8 Ds, because there are 8 words that start with D. Divulge and disseminate is all about opening up the language space, making languages visible, not just in the schools, but in the libraries, in the school space, in the classroom. Discover and develop is then, so once you've got that entry into opening up the language space, discover and develop is about looking at how we can engage with those languages in the classroom. How do we allow the children to use their languages? What do we do when children mix languages? How do we know about translanguaging? How many teachers here, for example, have heard of translanguaging or used translanguaging in the classroom? Can I have a show of hands? Very few. There's still a lot of training to do. Yes, so you know about that. Good. Great. And then there's deconstruct and de-dichotomize, and then we'll look at this a little bit later. We like polarity. You're either native or a non-native speaker of English. You're either learning a language as a foreign language, or then it's your mother tongue. It's always this either-or perspective. So how can we perhaps de-dichotomize language education? And then there's the decolonize and duplicate. Now, this is the one we're going to focus on today, even though what you will notice is there will be lots of overlaps and mixing up and of all these different, of these 8 Ds. Because this one allows you to focus on underrepresentation in English language countries or in these English language contexts. So, and it allows us to actually look at real multilingual societies. I mean, English is being spoken in societies that are highly multilingual, and we are not engaging with that. So, let's start by looking at the English-speaking world, and I don't think it actually exists, by the way. Sorry. I know, it's your job, I know, but we like maps, don't we? And this is a map of the English-speaking world. And down there, if you look at the number at the green, mother tongue use coexists with other languages. And South Africa, where I'm from, is right over there, right? It's green. So a mother tongue used with other languages. English is not my mother tongue. And in South Africa, we have very few people, actually 5 million out of 65 million. That's not a lot of people having English as a mother tongue. Another map, very similar. And here, South Africa is countries where English is the official language. Yes, English is one of 12 official languages in South Africa. That doesn't show there. And this is a map from, I believe, an Oxford, it's actually a poster from a course book created, I think it's Oxford University, and lots of English-speaking country again. But have you noticed how Africa now suddenly only has one English-speaking country? All the others have sort of disappeared. Remember in the other maps there were sort of some colors of like Nigeria, Kenya. Now they're all gone, it's only South Africa. These maps don't show you this. This is a map of Australia with all the languages that Australians speak. Because believe it or not, they don't only speak English. This is a map of North America with all the languages that existed and still exist in North America. We don't engage with that. And have you noticed how the borders are different? There are no borders. The borders are actually the language borders. It's the group of individuals who live in that space and speak that language and have that culture. Do you know any of these names? If you look at the map, do you know any of these names? Do you know any of these Native American Cree? You've heard of Cree? You've heard of Blackfoot? Okay, Mayan, Aztec, right? So we know some of them. The one that sticks out for me is Apache. Why? Because of the cowboy and Indian films. Remember those? Yes, so what can we do with this information? What can we do with, so when you start unpacking, so you've taken away that film of English speaking, and suddenly there's this wonderful diversity that we could work with. So what can we do with that? Now, yesterday we had this wonderful plenary by Sandy Morang, so you know what I'm going to show you now, don't you? Picture books. Picture books are a wonderful resource to take into the classroom and to start working with this diversity that exists in the English-speaking world, and you can do it in English, in your English classroom. So, We Are Water Protectors is a book about North America. And it's actually about the Dakota pipeline protests, where they were protesting the building of a pipeline through the land, and they were afraid that this pipeline was going to contaminate their water, their drinking water. What is interesting about these books is that you don't need to just have a discussion about one side, the bad companies that are building the pipeline, and the poor Native Americans who are going to lose their water. No, you can have a discussion about, okay, so why do we need pipelines? But what could we do about them? Why are we building them through this particular land? Can they be built elsewhere? So you can have a discussion around these issues through picture books. And then, of course, there's an ISCTE. Any one of you who was at Sandy's plenary, we have created 18 ISCTEs around books, picture books, that deal with and engage intercultural citizenship education. So this is just an example of a book in the series, and this one actually deals with Indigenous issues. Here's another one from the course, which is my map book. And this book has loads of personal maps. So maps don't have to be geographical, they can also be personal. And we'll look at some examples of how we can create personal maps as we go along. So if you just think, just a very quick overview of decolonial approaches, what is interesting about decolonial approaches is that they try and break borders. And if you remember that wall down the picture book that Sandy was showing us, it tries to break these walls. So instead of this superior versus inferior, civilized versus primitive, literate versus illiterate, first world versus third world, etc., etc. Now we've got global south versus north, global north. We're trying to categorize people depending on so many different categories. But what can we do to actually, instead of divide them, bring them together? Well, perhaps we can look at philosophies from these contexts. And one philosophy that you probably have heard of is Ubuntu. Ubuntu is now used quite a lot. I think people are aware of this philosophy. It is associated with South Africa, even though it is a bit wider than that. It is associated with people who speak the Bantu or Nguni languages, which a lot of South Africans do, like the Zulu and the Xhosa. But the spirit of Ubuntu is about reciprocity. It's about bringing together. But what I really like about this, it's about incompleteness. So I am incomplete without you. I am because we are. It sort of puts Descartes, you know Descartes? I am, therefore I think, therefore I am. It sort of flips that on its side and looks at, no, I am because of you, you are because of me, and we need to work together, and we need to sort of complement each other. Therefore, I think Ubuntu is about incompleteness. It's a bit of a messy concept because it's about incompleteness, and we can come together. And how can we do that? If you look at the picture behind, it's actually a page from this picture book, which I discovered recently. I Am You, a book about Ubuntu. And it goes through this concept because I feel sad because you feel sad. I feel happy because you feel happy. It's all about this engagement with the other and not about dividing each other. So I really like this picture book, and it's an interesting way of introducing the concept of Ubuntu, which is an indigenous worldview, an indigenous philosophy, into the English language classroom. So, sorry, let me go back here. When I was born in South Africa, as I mentioned. I grew up in South Africa, I was educated in South Africa, I went to university in South Africa, and I never learnt about Ubuntu. I wonder why. Any ideas? Apartheid. There was no reason to teach a white person about Ubuntu. Nobody actually engaged with Ubuntu in the white context. So that is what Ngugi wa Thiong'o, a Kenyan writer, calls the cultural bomb. And what is a cultural bomb? The biggest weapon wielded and actually daily unleashed by imperialism against the collective defiance is the cultural bomb. The cultural bomb is basically annihilating and destroying who you are, your heritage, your culture, your language, your way of doing things, your worldview. So by ignoring it, by throwing it aside, by not engaging with it, by not allowing these concepts into the language, into the classroom, you are destroying them. So let's have a look at this example. These are two old people. This is a beautiful photograph in the Stormont Library in Buda, where I live. And I'd just like you to look at this photograph and tell me, what do you see? What do you see? Two old people, there's an old card, so you think, this is about old Norway, perhaps, rural Norway. Anything else you see that is interesting, that you would like to question? Let's have a look at this bit over here. What is this? Can you see anything over here? You can't. It's actually the man's feet. Can you see his feet? No, you can't. I wonder why, because this is what his feet would look like. These are traditional Sami boots, and yet you can see they're made from reindeer skin. Keeps you very warm. Now, why can't we see them? What do you think's happened there? They were erased, yes. They were literally scratched out of, the photograph because we couldn't have Sami symbols in Norway. And this was what is called in Norway the Norwegianization process of forcing Sami, the local indigenous peoples, to become Norwegian. So we are erasing, so it's a concept of erasure, erasing everything about them, the clothes, their shoes, the language, the culture. So they also went through, it's a story that isn't very well known, but they also went through this process of trying to eliminate the presence of these people from schools and from the public sphere. So, When you look at ELT course books, then the indigenous cultures have not disappeared, they are still there. But once again, these are 2 pages from an ELT course book. The one on top, and this is another page, 2 double spreads. And if you look at the way that the people are presented in these 2 pages, are they not slightly different? Who's happy? These are happy, aren't they? They're happy, they're smiling, they're in the cinema, they're rollerblading, and I think she's actually listening to music, cycling. What about these up here? So you can see who, okay, do you know where these people are from? Can you tell where these people are from? But you can probably tell where these are from. So Australian Aborigine, from an Inuit individual, North American tribe, probably Maori, the Pacific, Samoan maybe. So there is a difference in the way that these people are presented. So these images, once again, the visual, are an opportunity for you to actually engage in critical discussions around the presence of indigenous peoples in this context, about that diversity that I was talking about in this context. And what questions are we going to ask? So why are these people looking at something out there? And look at these, they're looking straight at us. They're looking straight at us, smiling, very confident. Why are these people still dressed in their traditional clothes? I mean, do Native Americans walk around in their traditional clothes all the time and their feathers? Maybe not. Maybe they put it on for a powwow or something. Maoris certainly don't walk around in their traditional dresses. And then they all look rather sad, except this young boy, he's smiling. So it's not even about erasure of these, the multiplicity of cultures and languages in these cultures, in these contexts. It is also about misrepresentation of these individuals, of these groups of peoples. So what do we do about that? Picture books again. So what I did was, I tried to, in Norway, we have to engage with Sami. I have to bring in Sami perspectives, I have to talk, I have to into my teaching. So my question was, okay, I teach English, so how am I going to do this Sami perspective? How am I going to engage with that? Besides, okay, look at this website, Sami are reindeer herders, I mean, that's just that surface level cultural engagement with culture that we don't want. So picture books are great. And I discovered this picture book. Do you see English in this picture book? No. So 2 languages. The one at the top is Northern Sami, and the one at the bottom is Norwegian. So Norwegian. Plasten I havet means plastic in the sea. So what do you think the book's about? Plastic in the sea. Can you see plastic on the picture in the front cover? You can see plastic, can't you? Yeah, this is probably the plastic. And you've got some fish. The interesting thing about the language, which language is at the top? So Northern Sami is at the top, the indigenous language. That is a purposeful decision to give the indigenous language, which in society is actually has a lower status, to make it more important, to give it an important status. So are you engaging with the linguistic landscape of the picture books? That's also an important element. Look where the languages are, especially if you use dual language picture books. And then who are these 2 people? Who do you think they are? They're 2 divers, aren't they? They're divers, probably diving. Let's find out. When you open the book, the first page, this is what you see. 2 women Maori scientists in their lab coats, fat shoes, and in the front page they're arguing with each other because one is very neat and the other one's very messy. Just real people. But the interesting thing here is that they're Maori because of the face tattoos that appear in the image. But here you need to ask yourself another question. Do you know which question you need to ask yourself about these face tattoos? Face tattoos in the Maori culture are a sign of your clan, your heritage, your family. You can't just get a face tattoo like that. It's a message. It communicates to the other individuals who you are, where you come from. So what I did was I asked one of my colleagues in New Zealand, what do you think of these face tattoos? They're like, well, you know, we don't really know. We don't know what is the heritage, what is the background of these people, we don't know. So we need to be very careful about what we bring into the classroom as well. And we need to be very careful that we as teachers, what questions do we ask about the materials that we bring into the classroom and how we engage with these materials. So, but despite the issue, and we don't know if it's an issue or not, it's just like we don't know where these face tattoos come from, the book itself offers so many opportunities. First of all, in exploring environmental and gender issues. And here you have 2 Indigenous female scientists actually doing the work. They are actually doing the work. And then you've got the positioning of Indigenous voices in the classroom. How do we deal with that? Then we have making linguistic and cultural diversity visible in the classroom. So it's not just English, but in my local context, it's important that I engage with the Sami as well. And then there's a trilingual approach. So we've got 2 languages, Northern Sami and Norwegian, but we also have English. So all the work that was done around this book was done in English with my students in the classroom. So we're actually engaging with a multilingual approach through the use of a dual language picture book in 2 different languages. So the potential is enormous for engaging this diversity. Now, some more picture books. So there are more and more picture books that are written by Indigenous authors about Indigenous cultures, about Indigenous issues. So that potential of the cultural bomb, throw it back at you. I'm going to reclaim my voice. And you can do it in English, because these books are all written in English. However, sometimes we also need to do our own little research, because what do we know about these cultures? What do we know about these contexts? And what is really interesting now is also the history books that are being written, or the history of these particular contexts that are being written by Indigenous peoples for students. So if you look at the colonization and the Wampanoag story, it is actually about the Native Americans that were in the area when the British arrived. So, but this is a story from their perspective. We need to also hear the stories from their perspective. But what is interesting about this book is that it's in the library, and then there was some kind of controversy about whether it was a fiction or non-fiction. And there was a complaint, and apparently they moved this book into the fiction section. And then there was another complaint, it was moved back to the non-fiction section. This is the other interesting thing, is that when Indigenous cultures talk about their history, they blend in different ways of writing and different ways of talking about. They blend in myth, they blend in history, and that's something that we in the West still don't quite understand. So giving the children, therefore, not just the story, but perhaps the background as well. Because, for example, in South Africa, do you know when the history of South Africa started? Not thousands of years ago, in 1655, when Jan van Riebeeck came along with his boats and landed and decided, this belongs to the Dutch crown. I never got the history before that. I did not learn the history of South Africa before 1655. So you can see the journey that we need to make. Oh yes, and I like this Books Behind Bars. It's actually a website. Some books are banned. We know that books are being banned all the time, and these are some of the books that have been banned up until now. I recommend you read them. By the way, always read a banned book. But why are books banned? Why has this book been banned? Journey to Joburg. It's a story about South Africa, and it's a story that I bring into my teaching. It's a short chapter novel, so it can be used with like grades, grade 7, grade 6, 7, maybe 8. It tells a story of a journey of two children from where they were living in what we would call a township in South Africa to Johannesburg to come and fetch their mother because their younger brother or sister is sick. The interesting thing here is that, of course, her mother, these children's mother, was not living with them, and the children was not living with their mother because it wasn't allowed. So how do we talk about apartheid? When I asked my students at the university, I say, what's apartheid? Okay, South Africa? Yeah, Mandela? Oh, I've heard of him. They don't know apartheid. They don't actually know these stories. And so what's important is to actually give them these stories in order for them to understand the history of these English-speaking countries is not always wonderful. And here are just some examples of apartheid laws, because remember, apartheid is a structure. It is a structure that's put in place in order to keep people separate. And what you need are laws. And these are some of the laws. The Population Registration Act. So you are either black, white, colored, and you live in the areas based on the Group Areas Act. And then you go to a school, and there is Bantu education, there is white education. And then when you go out into the city, you are not allowed to actually go to the same toilets, sit on the same bench, go to the same swimming pools. That was apartheid. How do you actually tell anybody, or the pass law, all the black South Africans had to carry a sort of identity card? I didn't, they did. How do you tell individuals about this? How do you help them learn about a system like this? Well, visually. So what I did with the students was they went through a visual journey through apartheid by following the journey of these two children into Johannesburg. And as these children journeyed through Johannesburg, my students were plotting the points and the pivotal points in the story where apartheid impacted on these children's lives. So, for example, you've got here the Bantu education, the Separate Amenities Act, because there's a point where the children are not allowed on the bus because it was a white bus. So, and that's how the teachers discovered apartheid. And then they would say, the students really get to experience apartheid through this activity, or how it actually must have felt for the black people. So you really get them into the story through these visual activities. Back to ISPEL, and I just wanted to say that it's really interesting that we won an Elton, which is great. However, what does that mean? I keep asking myself, what does it mean? Does it mean that now ISPEL is going to be used more? Does it have an impact on how we engage with intercultural citizenship education? Does it open the classroom more? I don't know. I certainly hope it does. But there are loads of resources there that you can do and use in the classroom. And some more. There are, as I said, many, many picture books now that are coming up as well that also focus on activism. And you can see, Stay Angry, Little Girl, the artivist, I like that first one, the artivist, Ride Up, Not All Small. So there's loads of resources for you actually to take into the classroom. This is a wonderful linguistic landscape if you want, but there are other linguistic landscapes. And sometimes and I went to this wonderful session by Monica Lorenzo, and she was actually talking about linguistic landscapes. And they don't even have to be linguistic. They can just be visual. So as you're walking down the Royal Mile, or you're walking into a Pacific kindergarten in New Zealand, or you celebrating the 25th of April, or do you know where that flag's from? Has anybody ever seen that flag? Do you know that the Maori have their own flag? This is a Maori flag. so much we don't know about these contexts, and yet New Zealand is an English-speaking country. So look at the flags, look at the context, and then of course the whole design of the flag is very significant. Language education has not been easy, and there has been activism that needed individuals to go out on the streets and fight for their language. So I don't know if anybody knows the story behind the International Mother Language Day. No? On the 21st of February, I think it was 1954, if I'm not mistaken, that was just after the partition of India into Pakistan. There was Bangladesh and India. It was a bit of a mess. But in Bangladesh, the government decided we are going to use Urdu as the official language. And the people were, no, but we don't speak Urdu, we speak Bangla, that's our language. So these students went out into the street and they were protesting. Unfortunately, I think the police fired and 7 students were actually shot. So can you see, like, we celebrate in the International Mother Language Day, but someone had to fight for that day to actually exist, for them to actually be able to speak their language. So when we're in the classroom and now we've got students who speak different languages, should we not also give them the right to speak those languages? And this is a South African case where the black population were forced to learn in Afrikaans, which is one of the Afrikaans, one of the languages in South Africa, and yet they wanted to learn in English. And the police shot them. This is another story here, but this is a good story. We know how I don't know if you've heard this term, kill the Indian in him and then save the man. And you can see how this is the same boy who went into a residential school and came out like that. In 2024, this is not him, by the way. He would be very young. This is Solma Makwa. He's in Canada, and this was the Ontario legislature. He's a member of parliament, and May 2024, for the first time ever, he was allowed to use his language to address the parliament. And it was OG Cree. It's taken a very long time. It's a long journey for this visibility to take place and to happen. The first PhD written in Xhosa, can you guess when that was? 2017. So these individuals have been writing PhDs in English and Afrikaans, the first PhD written in Xhosa. And that is a great win, because it means we have academic language in isiXhosa, we have academic language in Zulu. So you can take it all the way to tertiary education. That's so important. But we need to be aware of these things. So speaking your language is an act of activism, actually. Just the fact that you're speaking your language in certain contexts is an act of resistance. And here you've got 2 writers, so Chinua Achebe and Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and they went 2 different ways completely. Chinua Achebe, I don't know if you know the book Things Fall Apart, very famous African novel. He decided to write in English because through English he says, I can be subversive and I can get to the world. I can tell them my story of colonization. Ngugi wa Thiong'o decided, no, I'm writing in Gikuyu, my language, because my people, that's the language they speak. I'm writing for them. So 2 different ways of addressing this English-speaking context. So yes, you are the best activist for your language, so you speak it. Now, in the classroom, the very first thing we do as teacher activists is learn about your students. Find out who they are. What languages do they speak? Where do they come from? How many languages do they speak? And this was a project at the British Council when I was working in Paris. We had a small bilingual section, and in that bilingual section, these are the languages that existed. These are the languages the children spoke. Besides English and French, these are the languages they spoke. There were 32 languages in this bilingual section at that time. And it isn't something that we really ever engaged with. Language maps. When you draw your language map, you're drawing your history. You're drawing your language history. And this is a language map that a teacher produced, this one, in my class, and then she took it into the classroom, and it's lovely to see how the student actually sort of mirrored her language map. But the student wrote at the end, "To be continued." They will be learning more languages, so I think we got something going there. But it's also visual. It's also visual. And the other thing I like about this map is that, can you see the teacher, how she's learning her languages? TV, there's a radio, but look at the child. Tablets and iPhones and stuff, so different generations. Translanguaging, we're all afraid, the big bad wolf, but actually translanguaging is so much fun. And this is a child, she's 3 years old, this was a Facebook post on my Facebook, and it's a dad, he wrote, "Yeah, every time she looks up at my laptop, she goes, 'Papi, todo esto se mine.'" Spanish, French, English, perfect sentence. And this is another one this was Twitter, when it was Twitter once upon a time. A colleague of mine was talking about it was actually his son. "My 7-year-old's latest language mixing, que vamos hacer with the drunken sailor?" Que vamos hacer with a drunken sailor? Que vamos fazer with a drunken sailor? You can speak it, you can sing it in Portuguese as well. And this is a teacher in my class, and she decided, okay, these are my languages, this is her language map, and this is what she writes. "Ich hablo un peu de Deutsch und English, aber my language numero uno es el Noruego." Why not? And this is what you would hear in South Africa if you were listening to a football match. "I Chiefs." Chiefs are the football. Yes. And then something about referee, and then sleg. So you've got Afrikaans, maar, but, why, benga, stoppie, the system, yeah. This is what you hear, 3 languages at the same time, so it is multilingualism and translanguaging in action. And the course books in South Africa are also multilingual, and you can see how English is mixed with the other languages. Here you've got a translation. This is ISCTE, fixed and fluid multilingual text, okay? Here you've got living and non-living things. The actual course book mixes with the languages because it reflects the reality of the context. We mix our languages all the time. And talking about mixing, I love this picture book. I don't know if you've come across this picture book. It's called Mixed. And it's been translated into quite a few languages. And here you've got Splash. Uma história de misturas coloridas. Tout mélangé, histoire de couleur. Insieme una storia de colori. But English, Spanish, French. But I don't know why the words mixed was translated into splash in Portuguese. Since when is Portuguese, splash a Portuguese word? Hey, but this is an interesting discussion to have in the classroom with your students. Why? And this is where I use a tangled translation activity. Have you come across this? Well, this is the beginning of the story. It's about 3 colors. You can see them on the slide. Now, what I did is I mixed the languages. Once upon a time, três cores. Reds, os amarelos, and blues. The reds eram os mais brilhantes. The yellows, os mais brilhantes. The blues, os mais calmos. So what do you do with this? You get these children to untangle the languages, and they create monolingual texts. Era uma vez 3 cores. Os vermelhos eram os amarelos e os azuis. Tadam, tadam. On the other side, you're going to write it in, oops, I'm going backwards, English, the full text in English. This activity is much more complex than just a gap fill, because you need to untangle all the, like, how does the sentence work? What verb do I put here? Where's the preposition? Word order. You have to sort of rethink word order. Kids love doing this. So what happens with these 3 colors? Let me just quickly tell you. They get angry because the Reds decide we're the best. No, you're not. And they all start living in 3 different parts of the city. But one day a blue and a yellow meet and they fall in love. And what happens? They have a little green. There he is. And then all the colors mix. And you have this wonderful opportunity to discuss diversity, inclusion, families, mixed families, etc. And you've done a linguistic activity and a translanguaging activity. So, of course, there is the language portrait silhouettes. You may have come across this one already. But this one is wonderful because the child, the 14-year-old, actually drew the organs, the brain, the heart, the intestines. And this is what this one writes. I put French where my brain is. Indeed, it is the first language that I have learnt, and I use it every day to think, write, speak. I put English in the place of my heart because it's my emotional and imaginative language. I put Moroccan in my hand. It is the hand that makes me feel safe because it is my mom's language. Arabic is part of me, my heritage, because my grandparents are from Saudi Arabia, and that's why they are the tree, the roots. But my intestines, look at that. I put Hebrew near my tummy because I'm Jewish, so Hebrew is deep inside of me. How important is that for this child? I put German in my hand because, indeed, I had to learn German, and hands represent orders. And Chinese, I wrote on my shoulder because it's a metaphor for I left it behind. Wonderful story about this child's languages. So the potential of his visual elements, of his visual approaches are great. Some of you may have actually already know this, but I'm going to ask you a question. I asked some of my students to bring in artifacts that represent your languages. One of them brought these 2 artifacts. What language do you think we're talking about here? Arabic? Okay. No. The students' 3 languages was English, French, and Spanish. So which language do you think this represents? Spanish? No. English. Now, why English? Why English? Because this child learned to speak English in a kindergarten in an international school in Dubai. For this child, Dubai, English will forever be associated with Dubai. So language is not about geography. It's about what's in here. It's about your identity. It's about the emotion that you develop with this language. Let the children tell you about those emotions. And here's another way you can also do that. And these are what I call, these are artifacts. So dominant language constellations is a concept of bringing your languages, talking about your languages. And you can draw them in many different ways. You can have them like a star, like a night sky, play around with word cards. You can also create your constellation with Play-Doh and toothpicks, or you can do it digitally. What I've been doing is creating artifacts. So a DLC artifact, or a language artifact, is a personal concrete object encapsulating aesthetic and kinesthetic processes, because you need to create it. You need to use your hands, not AI. That serves as a subjective external representation of an individual's full linguistic repertoire and naturally occur in DLC in a free and spontaneous activity. And that's what the teachers did in the course that I did with them online, the teachers here, with APPI, that actually did the course on multilingualism. And this is what the teacher created. It is such a beautiful artifact. It's a tree. So what did she conceptualize? I thought of a quilt or a wind charm, but then that was unrealistic. So she went for a tree, a bonsai tree, because they take a lot of you. You know, they take a lot of effort to keep going. And languages also take a lot of effort to learn and to maintain. And then she explains what she's doing with this artifact. She put the languages, a cluster of pseudo-languages that you are born with at the bottom. And she's got a stalk to symbolize the baby languages. And then she adds layers of languages as she's been learning them throughout her life. These artifacts tell you so much about the relationship that you have with your languages. So I've really enjoyed working with my teachers and the students and the children. These were created by 8th and 9th grade students in Norway. Just a project we've just finished. And the first one is a language bird. And the language birds are peace. I like how this child has associated his languages with peace. And then there's the racing track. This language, in this case, the children created the language, this racing track with the fastest car being the language he speaks best. And then there's a banana as well. So the creativity behind these artifacts allow you to actually express this relationship and your identity with your languages. And of course, it helps in shifting perspectives. Suddenly you realize, actually, maybe I'm multilingual because I've actually created an artifact with all my languages. It also allows a teacher to acknowledge that, wait a minute, my children might also be in this situation. Therefore, I need to be aware of this multilingualism in my class. And some teachers said, I was already multilingual, but now it was really interesting to see my languages outside of me in a visual artifact. So these are important processes to engage individuals with their languages. So, what kind of an activist are you? Are you a citizen? You know, you follow the law, you try and work within the system, and you try and make change within the system. Are you a rebel? You go out on the streets, yeah, you know, we need change. Are you a change agent to actually make change, to make sure that you can change? Or are you a reformer? Vejam bem. Vejam bem. You know that song, right? Yeah, you can sing it. Vejam bem. Não há só gaivotas no mar. Yes, sorry, that's okay. Yeah, carry on. Nem se põe a pensar, quando homem se põe a pensar. Love that song because it is about, you know, the revolution here in Portugal, and it's about you can make change just when you start thinking. Quando homem se põe a pensar, when you start thinking about what's not right, about what you can change as a teacher. And I'd like to finish with Celeste Guerreiro. And I'd like to dedicate this presentation to her because she, without knowing, she became an activist. At that moment where she handed out her, you know, she went to work on the 25th of April in 1974, and suddenly there was this revolution. She went outside, she had all these carnations, and she started handing out carnations, and then this became the peaceful revolution. The carnation became the symbol of this peaceful revolution. So I dedicate to Celeste Guerreiro, who in her humbleness and her humility became the activist that Portugal needed at the time. So thank you very much.